Welcome to the deep dive. You know how we do things here. We dig in deep, and today we're diving into Untold Pain.
Well, that's a powerful one.
It is. It's by Ingebire M. Clare, and it's more than just a memoir. It's like she gives us this guide.
To what? To how to live life after trauma. I mean, I know she's a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, so she's got firsthand experience.
Exactly. And she uses those experiences to help us all understand how trauma, any trauma, can shape us.
And how we can heal, which, I mean, that's the big question, right? Like, how do we heal?
She uses this analogy of a garden. It's so striking. Our inner strength, it's like a flower wants to bloom, but
there are all these weeds.
Yeah, like the negative thoughts, the burdens, the stuff we carry from our past. And it's not always obvious. It's like these weeds can pop up in places you wouldn't expect.
Oh, absolutely. Claire's really good at showing how trauma can impact us in ways we don't even realize. Like it can be fear, self-doubt, even relationship struggles.
And financial problems. I never really connected those dots before.
Right. It's like this ripple effect. One thing leads to another, and it can be hard to trace it back to the source.
There's this story Claire tells about her always wanting to please people. It stemmed from her childhood, from the trauma she went through, and it ended up with people taking advantage of her even as an adult.
Wow. That makes you think, like what about our own behaviors?
I know, right? How much of what I do is actually rooted in something from my past, something I'm not even aware of?
It's scary to think about, but it's also the first step towards understanding and healing, which is what Claire's all about. But, and this is important, it's not about blame.
You mean not blaming ourselves for how our past affects us?
Not blaming ourselves. And that's where self-compassion comes in, right? Claire really stresses that we all make mistakes, especially when we're dealing with the aftermath of trauma.
It's like we're trying to navigate through a minefield blindfolded. Of course we're going to step on something.
Exactly. She tells this story about Solange, a close friend of hers. Solange's husband left her and their kids, and she made a choice that, on the surface, looked like a big mistake.
People probably judged her pretty harshly.
Yeah. But Claire helps us see the whole picture, the impossible situation Solange was in.
She was just desperate to provide for her kid.
Right. So what looked like a bad choice was actually an act of love, in a way.
It really makes you question those snap judgments we make about people, huh?
Big time. So we've got acknowledging our pain, recognizing those patterns, and then this huge layer of self-compassion. It's like building blocks, right?
Yeah, it's like Claire's giving us this foundation for healing step by step. But it's got to start with acknowledging that pain.
Right. Not ignoring it, not pretending it didn't happen. She's really open about her own journey in the book. She found relief through writing, through crying, even just sitting with her grief.
Not dwelling on it, but like being present with it.
Yeah, giving herself permission to feel those emotions. And that's a big deal, especially when we think about societal pressures, like men are often told to suppress their emotions.
Be tough.
Exactly, which leads to unhealthy coping mechanisms. It's like instead of tending to those weeds, they bury them, but they just grow stronger underground.
So how do we do it? How do we create a safe space for our emotions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What works for one person might not work for another. But the important thing is to find healthy outlets, things that help you process those difficult emotions without judgment.
Claire also talks about this link between emotional pain and physical health. Like, they're not separate things.
Not at all. She gets into the science behind it, how trauma can trigger all these responses in the body, affect sleep, even your immune system.
I mean, she lists insomnia, headaches, even things like substance abuse as ways our bodies can react to emotional pain. It's like it's trying to tell us something's wrong.
Like a warning light flashing on the dashboard. And what's really interesting is how she connects untreated trauma to anger and violence. It's not about condoning those behaviors, but understanding where they might come from.
Hurt people.
Yeah, exactly. And so often, we just see the action, the behavior, but we don't see the pain underneath.
We're quick to judge without understanding the whole story. And that's something Claire really wants us to remember. We're not alone in this.
Feeling isolated with your pain is natural, but it's important to remember that countless others have walked similar paths.
She tells this story about finding comfort and watching Aframax videos on YouTube.
Aframax?
Yeah, those videos about people facing extreme hardship. It was a reminder for her that others had endured even greater pain than she had.
It's so easy to compare our struggles to other people's highlight reels.
Right. Like everyone else has it all figured out. But the truth is, we're all fighting battles no one else sees.
So the big question for all of us is, how do we find those connections, those resources or communities that can help us feel less alone?
It's about reaching out, isn't it? Knowing that we don't have to go through this alone.
Exactly. And then there's this whole other layer Claire talks about, the power of our mindset. She says that dwelling on negative self-talk keeps us trapped, keeps those weeds growing.
Like we're feeding the negativity instead of nourishing the positive.
Right. And she talks about practices like mindfulness and gratitude as ways to shift our perspective.
It's not about pretending everything's perfect, but choosing to focus on the good.
And remember how we talked about Claire reconciling with her husband? Well, he really put in the work to earn back her trust and forgiveness.
It wasn't just words, it was actions, right?
Exactly. He showed up, he changed his behavior, and that made all the difference. It's a powerful reminder that we can choose to focus on positive actions, on growth, rather than dwelling in past hurt.
So much to think about, right? As we're tending to these inner gardens of ours.
Yeah.
What are we feeding? What are we nurturing?
Such good questions to ponder. And we'll keep digging into these ideas as we continue exploring untold pain in the next part of our deep dive.
So we're back, still digging into untold pain and all its layers. Last time we were talking about tending to those inner gardens, remembering to nurture the positive.
And choosing our actions carefully, right? Like Claire's husband showing up, making those changes. Powerful stuff. But there's another big piece we got to talk about.
Oh, yeah. Forgiveness. That's a tough one. I always thought of it as something you do for the other person, like letting them off the hook.
Right. Like a gift you give them. But Claire kind of turns that on its head.
Yeah, she does. She's saying forgiveness is actually for you. It's this internal thing.
It's about releasing the burden, not for them, but for yourself.
There's that line in the book that hit me hard. Forgiveness is an act of self-love, recognizing our own inherent innocence.
Whoa. That's good. It's like when we hold on to anger, to resentment, we're actually punishing ourselves.
Yeah, how do you do it? How do you forgive someone who's hurt you, really hurt you?
Claire gives some techniques like self-reflection, compassionate self-talk, focusing on gratitude. It's not easy, though.
And what about forgiving yourself for your own mistakes? I mean, sometimes that's even harder.
Absolutely. Claire's honest about her own struggles with forgiveness, especially when it came to reconciling with her husband.
That must have been so tough.
I'm sure it was, but they both did the work, acknowledged their pain, took responsibility. It's like forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about moving forward without being chained to it.
Making space for healing, for growth.
Exactly. But forgiveness is just one part of this whole journey, right?
Yeah.
Claire also talks about finding your purpose. Like a lot of people, they might be successful, have all the things, but still feel empty.
Like something's missing.
Yeah. And Claire's point is that emptiness might come from not living in alignment with your true calling. Like you're tending to someone else's garden instead of your own.
So how do you find that, your purpose? I mean, it sounds kind of big and overwhelming.
Claire says, start by asking yourself some key questions. What are you naturally good at? What are you passionate about?
Mm-hmm.
What makes you feel alive?
It's not just about a job.
Right.
It's bigger than that.
Right. It's about using your unique talents, your gifts, to make a difference in the world. And she says, it's never too late to tap into those passions. Like, remember what lit you up as a kid.
Oh, man, so many things. I used to love to. Well, never mind. That's embarrassing.
No, it's not. That's exactly what Claire's talking about. Reconnecting with that younger self, with the things that brought you joy.
It's like somewhere along the way, we lose that spark.
We get bogged down with responsibilities, expectations, but Claire's message is don't be afraid to reclaim those passions, even if they seem silly or unconventional.
Like the world needs those unique voices, right?
Absolutely. It's about trusting that inner compass, that thing that makes you, you.
So as we keep tending to these inner gardens, maybe it's time to ask ourselves, what brings me joy? What makes me feel alive?
What are my gifts, and how can I share them with the world?
Big questions, but important ones. And we'll keep exploring them as we move into the final part of our deep dive. Okay, so final part of our deep dive into untold pain. We've covered a lot of ground, from those sneaky weeds of trauma to, finding our purpose. But through it all, Claire's message is clear.
Hope, resilience. It's like no matter what you've been through, you can heal. You can build a good life.
One thing that really stuck with me is how she says, healing isn't like this finish line you cross. It's a journey, right?
Oh, totally. It's ongoing, ups and downs.
Yeah.
And Claire's really honest about that, about her own struggles. It's like even after all this work, she still has hard days.
It's reassuring in a way.
Yeah.
Like no one's perfect. Healing isn't about never feeling pain again.
It's about how you deal with that pain and knowing you don't have to do it alone.
She talks a lot about support systems, right? Like therapy, friends, even just knowing there are others out there who get it.
Community is huge, but she also finds comfort in those smaller things. Time in nature, journaling, just taking care of herself. It's like those little things add up.
It made me think about my own self-care routine. Like, what am I doing to tend to my inner garden?
Right. Back to that analogy. It's not just about pulling weeds. It's about planting good seeds, too. Feeding yourself what you need to grow.
So big picture, what are we taking away from Untold Pain? What are those core things we can remember?
Well, got to start with acknowledging the past, right? The good ain't the bad, seeing those weeds for what they are.
But not getting stuck in blame. Claire's big on self-compassion. We're all messy. We all make mistakes. Be kind to yourself.
And forgive. Forgive yourself. Forgive others. It's tough, but it opens up so much space for healing.
And don't forget about purpose. We all have something to offer. Tapping into that, it can bring so much meaning to life.
Claire's story proves that. She went through hell, but she found her way back to joy, to love, to a purpose that's bigger than herself.
It's inspiring, for sure. Untold Pain, it's not just a book, it's a guide. It shows us how to be resilient, how to find that strength within. So, yeah, check it out if you're interested. And if you're struggling, please don't suffer in silence. There's help out there. We'll put some resources in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. It's been a powerful one.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep tending to those inner gardens.